I think he's in New York City, and it has to do with voter ID laws. And he's going up to all these white people, and he's asking, do you think these laws are racist? Like having to have an ID to vote. And their answers are actually the most racist thing you've ever heard, because they're like, well, of course it is, well, they may not know they need an ID, or they may not have access to a DMV, or they may not have the money for an ID. You need to know, like, do you realize that inherently you're saying people of color are too stupid, they don't know they need an ID, they don't have the money to have an ID, they have nowhere to go where they would need an ID?
I think voter ID laws are a way to perpetuate racism.
Would you go as far to say those laws are racist?
For sure.
Do you think it suppresses the African American vote?
Definitely.
Tell us how.
Because they're less likely to have state IDs.
Minority voters are less likely to have the kinds of IDs that have been described or required.
These type of people don't live in areas with easy access to DMVs or other places where they can get identification.
You can always get IDs you do over the internet. Is that also would make it difficult for black people in particular?
Yeah, you have to have access to the internet. You have to be able to pay an internet service provider for certain fees.
Do you think that's harder for black people to go online?
Well, I feel like they don't have the knowledge of how it works.
A lot of people have smartphones, but you might not have data.
For most of the communities, they don't really know what is out there just because they're not aware or they're not informed.
I also think there's a repression of black voting with how if you're a convicted felon, you're not allowed to vote and everything. And when you look at swing states like Florida, that's a huge population of the African American.
And then he goes and speaks to black people, and they're like, of course I have an ID. What are you even talking about? So for me, I think this whole thing unto itself is actually racist. The whole virtue signaling unto itself is bizarrely racist. And it takes a group of people, in my opinion, and I'd love to know what you think about this, and it says, no. You're a victim. And when you tell somebody they're a victim, you're fundamentally disempowering them to take control of anything ever, though.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's very infantilizing.
Yes.
Really, the people in the video you're talking about, I hadn't seen that video, but
I'll send it to you. It's deeply upsetting.
But I can imagine.
It's very disturbing.
It doesn't surprise me that those were the results of the video. And really, what you have is the white people in that video treating the black people like they're children. Because that's what I would say. Like, if you asked me, is it reasonable to expect my 11-year-old son to have an ID? I would say all those things. I'd say, well, no, he doesn't need an ID in his life. He wouldn't know where to get one. He wouldn't know how. And that would be true of a child, but of an adult. Like, if you're an adult, not only do you have to have an ID to do normal things like, I don't know, drive.
Right.
Get a house, get a credit card, rent an apartment, like anything. To be a functional person, you need to have an ID in this country. But it's also, if you're an adult, you can figure out, it's a thing that hundreds of millions of people have done in this country. So to suggest that someone, because they're black, would have trouble doing this basic thing that for you is no big deal.
They're racist.
It's very fatal.
It's racist to say that the person needs an ID because everything you just said.
Right. I think
they're so incompetent and incapable they can never figure it out.
Yeah. It is. I mean, it's a weird kind of. I think it is racism. It's a weird kind of racism because the people that are engaging in that form of racism, they don't.
No.
They don't dislike. It's like they don't. Usually you think of racism as, well, I hate people of other races, which is what racism usually is. Those white people in the video, I think they probably don't hate black people.
And they clearly think less of them. They clearly do. They're exposing themselves.
They think of them as inferior, which is really what racism is.
That to me is true racism.
But they would never say that. If you ask them, do you think black people are inferior? Of course, they would deny that until the cows come home. But how else do you, the proof's in the pudding. I mean, you think that these are people who are not capable of living adult lives. And here's the thing, I as a white, as a straight white male myself, in our society, in the mainstream, I am the uber villain, right? Like this is the reason why all the bad things happen in the world is because of those damn straight white males. But the truth is that
I was thinking that about you.
Right.
For sure.
Of course. And I don't really like being villainized, but the honest truth, I would rather be villainized based on my demographic group than be infantilized and told that I'm a victim and victimized on my behalf. So I would rather, I think in a way, we have it better because I'd rather you look at me and say, you're a bad guy, you're evil. I don't like that, but it's like, okay. But then for these other groups, you're turning around and saying, well, you're a helpless victim. And me personally, I would rather you just think I'm evil than to treat me like a child, like I'm helpless, like I can't do anything, like I'm not in control of my own life. That to me is a hopeless message. It's a demoralizing message.
Keeping it real with Jillian Michaels.